That's assuming you'd want one.
I thank you, Vice President, for coming here in the 3rd Congressional District in one of the most fantastic places in the city and in the state. I think that basically you will see today and hear from all of these fantastic people some great stories. They're residents of West Philadelphia. That's where you are in this area. And they just have, I was just talking to them in the back, and they have some fantastic things. And I think this is a great opportunity you have to hear. And Tiffany, who I told her, don't be bashful. The Vice President doesn't bite you. I told her, don't be bashful. You get your chance and speak your mind. So, Tiffany, you want to start? Tell them what you was telling me in the back room when you said the Vice President.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Tiffany, how are you?
I am wonderful. So as Congressman Evans said, my name is Tiffany Easley. I am the owner of NB My Eyewear, which is a full-service optical store in West Philadelphia. As well as having my business in West Philadelphia, I'm also a resident of West Philadelphia. We've been in operation now for about 3.5 years. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. We've been in operations for about 3.5 years now. And I have a lot of ideas of what should happen in West Philadelphia as far as small businesses.
I'd like to hear them. I'm looking forward to hearing them.
Tamika, you be ready, right? Tamika also is on the front line. I would deem her as the essential worker in what she does, and she's in a very proud union that does a lot for this city and this country. And I've, had the opportunity to just listen to Tamika's story and the things. So why don't you, Tamika, tell the Vice President some of your thoughts.
Hi, Tamika.
My name is Tamika Anderson. I'm a central worker. I work downtown at 15th Street, the One Liberty Place, cleaning. I also live in West Philly. So basically, I'm here just to find out what can be done different so things won't happen the way that they're happening now.
Vice President, here's someone who's not a stranger. We have known each other for, I won't say how many years, but we've known each other a lot. I would like for her, in addition to talking about the Enterprise Center, is give you a little history of this location so the Vice President has a little feel of you, Della.
I could never dance well, Della. So
well, Congressman Evans, he's probably too young to know anything about American Bandstand.
Thank you. I love you. I know everything except I couldn't dance. But other than that.
But you are sitting in the birthplace of American Bandstand.
Yep.
This was the first building built in our country as a television station from the ground up by Walter Annenberg. Yep. And at that time, he owned the Philadelphia Inquirer, and he owned the letters WFIL, which is now at 6th City Avenue, and Dick Clark used to stand right in front of that mural. This is where the bleachers used to be, and this literally was the dance floor. And my last name happened to be Clark.
Oh, you're kidding.
So I took a picture around of this building and said that Dick was my first husband, and it was before integration, and I ended up with the building. And I am pleased to tell you, we've been in this building 23 years, and when we moved in 23 years ago, we opened up our doors without any debt because I was able to convince the business, the federal government, and state and city that we couldn't afford to open up our doors with debt because we knew we could not be financially induced by our pressure, that we couldn't help minority entrepreneurs. And the organization is 30 years old, and I've been here 28 years of the 30 years.
You've done a heck of a job.
Yep. Well, I knew, Vice President, that when I walked into the Enterprise Center, that it was God's assignment in my life, and I'm staying here until my job is done.
Wow. If I have anything to do with your job, it's going to be made easier, not harder.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. I'll give you some orders before I leave.
Oh, right. I don't have any doubt about that. I don't have any doubt about that.
So, Vice President, you want to, talk about the Biden plan? And
well, what I'd like to do is, first of all, thank you all. And do we have copies of what I'm? You've gotten it, okay. Look, the National Bureau of Labor Statistics points out there's 3.3 million business owners have shut their doors since February. 3.3 million. And God willing, a lot will open up again, but 41% of African American businesses have shut their doors, 32% of Latino businesses, and 19% of white businesses. And Trump may have forgotten about coronavirus, but he hadn't forgotten about us. And we have 20 million unemployed, you all know that. And the failure to respond to the pandemic, I think the federal government has abdicated any effective leadership role. The White House, at least, has abdicated that role. You know, the rapidly rising I don't know, his just inability to focus on any federal responsibility. Him saying, I take no responsibility, it's not my problem, I don't have this responsibility. But, you know, what I've laid out here for you is the outlines of a major, a much larger initiative that I hope, if elected, and before we elected, if that occurs, that we're going to be able to do. And so we have to give guidance, it seems to me, better guidance than we've been able to give. And so what I talk about here is Trump has basically had a one-point plan: open businesses, just open. But it does nothing to keep workers safe and keep businesses able to stay open. And secondly, it has done very little to generate consumer confidence. A lot of businesses that are ready to open also find themselves positioned that the customers aren't coming. They don't have the confidence that they're ready and safe. And so I lay out here, and I don't want to get too wonky here, but how I think we should approach it, and what responsibility I think the federal government has to begin to deal with us getting out of this dark hole we're in. And the first one is to, which we've been saying for a long time, Dwight's been saying it as well, and that is you got to guarantee testing, and you got to guarantee the availability of personal protective equipment, and for anybody called back on the job, period. And you have to, and it has component parts. Direct the federal government to provide regular and reliable COVID-19 tests for every worker called back to work. They should be able to be tested and paid for by the federal government. The federal government pay for all of the testing, and make it available that they have rapid results, and for the duration of this crisis, be able to continue to do that. Secondly, you got to ensure that all workers in all communities have access to effective personal protective equipment. We already now know we don't have, if there's another bounce back here, we don't have the equipment ready for this next occurrence if it bumps up, and you see the states now that are showing an increase in hospitalizations. And so, you know, you have to make sure we may have access to effective personal protective equipment across the board. And no worker should be forced to give up benefits and return to work in unsafe conditions unless they're able to have the protective care available to them. And third part of that guaranteeing testing and personal protective equipment is we have to ensure workers and unions have a voice in reopening plans. These decisions by tribal governments as well. You know, I've laid out a detailed plan, which I won't go into now, but we have to be able to deal, I think we should establish, and I will establish, what we call a pandemic testing board, not unlike what Roosevelt did in a different circumstance, a national testing board during the Depression, to surge testing nationwide and ramp up the production and fair distribution of the PPE. The federal government still hasn't taken responsibility for where that equipment goes, how it gets there. We should have from the beginning. I think Dwight joined me, or I joined Dwight 3 months ago, saying we should have essentially a commander, just like all military equipment, there's a supply officer, knows where it has to get, who needs it, where it goes. We need the same kind of supply officer nationally to know where the need is and what equipment is needed and how to get it to people that need that equipment. And parenthetically, I think what we should be doing right now is, were I in office, I would be taking $25 billion, putting essentially a vaccine czar in charge. When, God willing, we get this vaccine, how will it be distributed? Where will it go? How will it get there? How will we guarantee that it will be able to be distributed in a way that all Americans have equal access to it? Because the same thing's going to happen. Let's, God willing, we get a vaccine. Maybe one, if God was great, maybe even in the fall. I doubt it. I hope it. But probably beginning of next year. Where does it go? We're going to be faced with the same kind of dilemma, Dwight. Mm-hmm. How does it get to whom? And how does it not get the way it was, the way in which all the work you guys did in the Congress, all this legislation you passed, most of the help went to the very wealthy, went to the corporations, went to the people who hang out at Mar-a-Lago. They didn't get to where it was designed to get. 40% of all the money for small businesses, only 40% of it got there. And then it didn't get there in a way that I'm sure you can talk to, Tiffany, and others can. So that's the first part of this. The second piece of this is I think we have to guarantee paid leave, for federal paid leave, for anyone who gets sick. And if they so they shouldn't have to choose between their paycheck and their health. And so what I would do, and I have it laid out here, is that I would ensure paid leave for all workers who get sick from COVID. And the paid leave would be paid for by the federal government, and for as long as they need to recover and have a complete quarantine. And I'd also guarantee federally funded paid leave for workers caring for family members who have COVID, who are back home. They should be able to be off and not have to work. Now, I would also ensure, the third thing I would do, I'd ensure worker protection and accountability. Look, right now, some of you who are, I know anybody involved with labor knows about Osha, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And they have to set down, and they should be setting down, rigorous standards for the context in which it's safe to reopen and how you reopen, in terms of not just social distancing, but in, for example, meatpacking plants, slowing down the line so that people don't have to rush and be closer together, making sure there's plastic dividers, a whole range of things. But that's the job of occupational health and safety. And they should be doing it across the board to give advice to small businesses how they can and should open. And so right now, we have to, we have to be in a position where there's rigorous emergency temporary standards protections for all the workers who go back. And we have to protect workers not fully covered by OSHA. We don't cover some, for example, we don't cover a lot of public employees directing other agencies to enforce this. Everyone should be covered by this, who are ordinarily covered during the period of this crisis. And, we got to pursue tough fines for those larger businesses that don't abide by the standards or recklessly expose their workers to this. I'm beginning to get bored by my own talk here, but why don't I, instead of going through all of this, why don't we talk about, give me your sense of what you worry most about in going to work, opening and having to close while you close and open your business, and what you think small businesses need the most help in. I'll speak later to, building a national contact tracing workforce. We can do, and we can do it quickly. Protect older Americans and people with disabilities who have special needs. There's things we can do. Providing technical assistance to small businesses, from accounting capability, lawyers, the things that need to be able to get access to what is needed out there. We should have, for example, a safer shopper program. If in fact a business abides by all the rules that are set out to enhance the probability that someone can walk in safely and everything is being met, they should be able to get a certificate safer shopper, plastered on the window of the business that you can walk in because they've taken all precautions that are rational and necessary in order to protect the safety of the customer. But there's a lot of other things we can do. But why don't you talk to me a little bit about what's on your mind, what worries you most about your business, what worries you most about what's happening to Tamika SEIU workers, and thank you for your national endorsement. I mean, you in fact are really up against it, so many folks. We should be, for example, having a circumstance where if we have the whole idea of the thing that the congressman did in terms of the CARES Act was to keep people employed. And so I propose that we have, not just an unemployment system, but an employment system, insurance. So that, for example, if you have 25 workers and you only have enough work for 12, you keep them on the roll, all 25 on, you pay them half pay, and the federal government makes up the rest of the pay. So you're able to keep the workforce in place throughout the time. And the whole idea is once you're fired, once you're laid off, once you leave, the longer you're out, the harder it is to get reemployed later on, especially if, in fact, you're a minority, if you're black or brown. And so there's a whole range of things we can be doing. But rather than me go through everything that I think we should be doing, because I've been talking about this a lot, tell me what, if I had a magic wand, what's the thing you would want me most to be able to do to help deal with your business, your safety, and what you think we should be doing to help promote and maintain access from everything to capital to employment for small business, particularly minority businesses.
Tamika, you heard that what the Vice President said to you, and we were saying in the back room, this is your chance. He was
Really? I mean, I'm anxious to hear.
You want
Yeah, she took her mask. You
Oh.
ready? Go ahead.
to? You're good. Tiffany?
You said that magic wand, and just regards to the pandemic and being a small business and having to open, because the longer we stay closed, I don't make any money. I didn't get a large funds for the PPP. I got what they told me that I could get, even though I was eligible for more. I am most afraid for my staff coming back. Most of my staff had newborn babies during this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So they're more afraid to come back and contract the virus and take it back to their newborn babies.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I do when I don't have any more PPP? I've dipped into my savings already. I have to open, so I can't really open my store at 100% capacity because me by myself, I can't, service everyone fairly and give them the service that they deserve. I can't fire my employees, because that's my team. I appreciate them and I understand what's going on, but what do I do when they have to stay home, but I still have to open, and I don't have any more funds to be able to pay them to stay out, and I can't work at full capacity to be able to have income come in to run my business the way that it should. So I think if you had a magic wand, and if it was up to you and you were in place to do so, to make it a little bit easier for small businesses like mine, not small businesses like, and maybe I shouldn't say names, but like the larger corporations that are considered small businesses, but to really make it easier for small businesses that have, anywhere between 20 and less employees to have access to capital, to have access to some government funds to help you to continue to pay your employees, to help you to continue to stay open.
Let me ask you a question. How many employees do you have?
Originally it was 6.
6. But how many you've closed? You have 3 outlets? And
I have 2, and I had to close 1.
Close 1. And how many were at that outlet?
So the one that I had to close, it was 3 employees.
Right. Now, what is the overhead beyond salary? I mean, in terms of rent, you don't have to give me a number, but did you have enough money for rent, for improvements you needed to make to be able to cope with the COVID, to be able to?
Absolutely
Right.
not.
And did you seek any help in getting grants to be able to do that?
I did.
And what happened there?
I was able to get a grant, and I was able to get a loan. I was able to get a loan from the Enterprise Center, and I was able to get a grant from the Merchant Fund. they were small grants. They were, and I know that it had to be spread around. I was blessed enough to be able to get those grants. They were gone within a day because my bills exceed what I got.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Congress has been talking about in this new act they've passed and the Senate Republicans are holding up is whether or not you are able to get not just a loan for overhead, but a grant that if you're keeping people employed, then you get significantly more money to be able to deal with overhead costs. And that is everything from electricity to heating, air conditioning, opening the doors, whatever. And that is not a loan, that would be a grant. One of the things that I propose here is that we don't have very much information from a medical standpoint on what the impact of COVID is from a parent to a child or a newborn. And so I propose we spend a fair amount of money in research, focusing now, providing research now where NIH focuses on zeroing in on what is the impact, what are the impacts on infants, on young children, of parents who are may be exposed to COVID at their work, because they are scared to death, as you said, that, my Lord, last thing I want to do is go to work. I could be someone who is not showing any signs of having COVID and have it. And that's why the testing is so important for those people coming back to work as well, being able to be tested. But with regard to the whole notion of whether or not you're going to be able to restart a small business, one of the things that, as I indicated before, is that too much of the money in these programs has gone to big business. Most people don't think 500 employees is a small business. And the mainstream business, Main Street businesses like yours that have fewer than 50 employees, fewer than 20 employees, some as few as 10 employees, they're the ones that are getting crushed right now. And so I think we have to have, also enough technical assistance to be able to provide small businesses like yours with the ability to have access to accountants and lawyers and others to how you apply for, how you qualify for, how you in fact can take full advantage of what is out there that's not being taken advantage now. And so I really think that one of the things that we have to think about is this testing and tracing. That also is going to take a lot of pressure off of employees who are coming back to work to know when they go home they are going to not be taking it home to their family, whether they're taking care of an elderly mom or they have a 6-month-old baby. But it requires also to have all the protective gear and the safety circumstances required for your particular business. Every business is slightly different. And so tell me about your business. Tell me about the dealing with the eyewear. Do you do testing?
We do. So we're full service. So I have optometrists that come in, and it was hard trying to get them to come back. We did follow the CDC guidelines for optometrists, and because they work closely with the patient, and then when the patient comes out, as an optician, we work closely with the patient. So we have to be in close proximity to the person that we're working with. So we do try to take temperatures. We do require everyone to wear a mask. We do have the hand sanitizers. Those things are running out, and it's very hard to get. When I need the supplies of hand sanitizer, now I'm going to the store, and an 8-ounce bottle is $15. When I need to buy 10 bottles of that to last me throughout the month, because not only do I have to supply for my employees, I also need to supply for my patients or my customers that also come in.
Right. I think that should be covered by the federal government.
I think this should be covered too.
It should be covered, and but I'm serious. But it is, and under the way the law was written, it was intended that it be able to be covered. But what happens is people don't know enough to know what it is they can qualify for and what they can get. Tell me, Della, what when people are coming into the center and their businesses are in trouble, what do you tell them? I mean, what's the most frequent thing that you get asked for help for?
Capital.
Capital.
Yeah. But before we leave Tiffany's story, I want to make one point.
I thought it was tied to it. I wasn't trying to leave it.
Yeah. She's one of our clients.
Okay.
Okay. Is that Tiffany is a good example of an entrepreneur that was working in what I would call pre-pandemic, the old economy. We're now facing an economic reset, and there's going to be a new economy. And so an entrepreneur like Tiffany, who required a place-based strategy of a client coming in her door to get glasses, and we had this conversation as we were waiting on you, is that she now needs to pivot to build a technology infrastructure for a e-commerce, so that whether I go to her optometrist or not, I can send her my prescription. I can look online at her eyeglasses, and she can still generate revenue while we continue to figure out this COVID-19 pandemic and PPE, because she still needs to get business, but she doesn't have the dollars now to invest in that technology platform that she needs in order to be ready for this new economy. And so going back to your question and my response around capital, right?
Yep.
Is that as you were driving to this building here and to this center, you entered into a distressed community. And so one of my first orders, because I'm bossy, is that as you look at these distressed communities, I'd like for you to change your lenses and look at them from a standpoint, how do I use my influence to convert them from distressed to prosperous? And how do we lay those sticks strategically to accomplish that? And one of the biggest things in these distressed communities is under supply of capital, right? I would like to see Tiffany become multi-millionaire.
Me too.
Okay? Do acquisitions. But we don't have the capital as a service provider to invest in her. And we don't want to be just debt lenders. We want to be also equity investors. So we need blended capital, right? Because right now when Tiffany comes to us, all we can do is make her a loan. And what we're doing, Vice President, is stacking on more debt, stacking on more debt. She'll never be able to grow with debt. It puts her in a position of where she is a risk manager versus a growth manager.
I got that. And that's why this is not the totality of what I've done. As you probably know, I double the amount of money for this SBA and small business loans.
Yep.
And I cut the interest rates on it. And you know all this stuff about it.
I got another wand, too.
Yeah, well, I tell you what. Well, the other wand is that, but what I was trying to get at is the immediate concern of this moment.
Yeah.
One, we have to look, I see this in two phases. The first phase of this is how do we deal with the stimuli to keep the economy from completely crashing? And the second thing is, how do we then rebuild the economy? How do we reinvest in the things that are going to be the future? How are we going to bring people to a different place?
Right.
And they require significant investment.
It's significant.
For example, we, I call for over $1 trillion in increased spending by the federal government on infrastructure, including dealing everything from housing to a whole range of things. I mean, and in addition, we should be moving in a direction that, look, I'm the guy that managed the $830 billion handed out in our administration in the Recovery Act. And if you remember, you got a lot of it, and that less than 0.2% was waste or fraud. But it requires a national plan, it requires a national coordination, and it requires to have the fancy word that is used in Congress is that there should be someone who is able to look into all of this. In other words, somebody who follows this every single day that's independent of the president, independent of the Congress says this isn't being spent well. Inspectors General. Well, guess what? This president's fired every inspector general. First thing I'm going to do as President of the United States, if I end up being President of the United States, is hire an inspector general to go back and look at the entire $2 trillion you guys appropriated and spend the time with a fine-tooth comb going through who got it, who cheated, who in fact didn't deserve it, and pay them back and get it paid back, and or go after them for violations of the law if they violate it. But And that includes a whole range. We got to build a new economy. For example, one of the things that is going to be necessary is for you to be in a position to be able to just right now, if you just had, the ability to have considerably more telemarketing than what you have right now. I don't know whether you have that capacity now. But what I'm talking about today is the immediate need to keep bread on the table, to keep people employed, so that when the economy does begin to come back and we do all these larger things, which I'll send you a 60-page copy of what I'm proposing, is that people are still alive. People are still, we haven't broken up more families. We haven't put people in a position where they're in debt for so long they can never get out. We haven't put people in a position where they, in fact, have given up and become very depressed. For example, one of the big things we're going to have to do, and I know you know it, is significantly increase access to mental health. Significantly increase access to mental health, not just for African Americans, across the board.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole range of those things. But in the meantime, for example, what we should be able to do is make sure that everybody, for example, has access to housing. Everybody, for example, if we got to learn how to allow people to accumulate wealth. How do they accumulate wealth?
Yep.
They accumulate wealth, the vast majority of people, through investments in their home. They build equity in their homes. If, for example, the homes of African Americans were valued at the same number that the white home, the same exact home, was valued at, because of the prejudice that exists, it's not. It would be it'd be $154 billion more wealth among African American communities just by the valuation of homes.
Yep.
So there's a whole range of those things. But what I'm trying to figure out is how we keep people from drowning at the moment, at this moment. And for example, if you're going to build, we're going to go back to work. How do we go? Like, for example, there are no standards. How we send kids back to school or daycare. None at all.
None.
What are we going to do? We got to lay that out now, because for example, I think every single solitary person out there who has a child should have child care. I think every single, paid for by the federal government, if they don't have the income.
We were just discussing that with a friend of mine, that even my job, they're calling people back, but they're calling them on a Friday and say report to work Monday. And like, what are they going to do with their kids now? Who's going to watch their kids? Who can afford to pay child care at this moment if they had someone to watch the kids? And so
they're the things I think that we have to put in place now to get us to survive through this, to get people so they all aren't drowning, so we don't end up in such despair and loss. But most of all, what we're going to have spent probably by January close to $3 trillion to try to save people from total bankruptcy or save people from absolutely having nothing to be able to provide for themselves or their families. And how do we get that done? How do we get that done? Because we have to then we're going to come in with the real genuine, what we call, rebuilding, the changing for the 21st century. For example, schooling. I'm sure people come into you right now. We're finding out that what we knew, I've been trying to get a $200 billion passed to be able to provide for high-speed internet for the entire country. Well, guess what? A lot of people don't have it. A significant number, particularly in rural areas, even more than in urban areas. But even in urban areas, at home schooling, how does that work if you don't have a computer?
Good.
How's that if you don't?
No.
What are we going to do about that? Because what's happening is we're going to find people further and further and further behind. And so from my standpoint, the way I look at this is kind of in two phases. How do we keep people from falling off the cliff completely? Keep them on dry land up there, number one, and have them be able to move forward. And then how do we move them into a completely different circumstance than they were before? We have a chance to make significant institutional changes that exist out there. Like I said, we're one of the only civilized countries, industrialized countries in the world, I misspoke, industrialized countries in the world that does not have, child care, that does not have paid leave, that does not have all these things that people that affect their daily lives. And so there's a lot of institutional changes that we can and will make, and we lay them out. For example, the proposal I put forward, I'm not going to bore you with it, it doesn't affect your day-to-day operation right now, but the proposal I put forward, every expert looked at, it's going to create at least 10 million new jobs, 10 million new and high-paying jobs, not $6 an hour, $8 an hour, not even $15 an hour, but 48 or $50 an hour. For example, we're going to install in the first year that I'm president over 550,000 charging stations in every new highway. We're going to own the electric vehicle market. Why should that not be us? But that's not going to affect your eyeglass business today, this moment. And so there's a whole range of things that, and so what I'm trying to find out today is how do we build, for example, everybody's been saying, all the experts have been saying from the beginning, that you have to test and trace. You see what's happening when you don't trace. You see what's how it's gone, how the coronavirus is escalating in states now. Okay, not all states, but at least 12 of them escalating, and probably going into the winter, it's going to probably get worse. So what are we doing? Well, there are a lot of people that are unemployed now, particularly young people. What I'm proposing that we do is we have a nationwide data-driven disease surveillance system. We need to hire 100,000 people now as tracers from communities. Pay them a decent wage to be the ones who go out and trace when they find a new COVID case. That's the thing, only thing we know was going to ultimately, before a vaccine, that's going to make a difference. That's going to keep things down. But we can do that. For example, but permanently, I think we need entire new public health corps out there. We need to be able to provide for significantly greater care across the board in terms of public health. And that can create millions of jobs across the country. But my point is that what do you do right now to ensure that there's worker protection, there's accountability, and as we reopen responsibly and put you in a position where you're safe when you show up to work, and it's guaranteed you're going to be safe, where you're tested, tracing going on, and the circumstances, the protective gear and the protective circumstances that you work in exist. And how are you going to be in a position now to be able to reopen and be able to do what needs to be done to provide for what you do in terms of giving people? For example, we're finding out that a lot of optometrists are in trouble right now because people don't want to go in and put their eye up against that glass and have someone else looking that close to them, and and they're worried. Well, what can you do about that? There are things that can be done to increase diminish significantly the likelihood that you are going to be spreading the disease. Because even if everything worked and you had everything available, for example, what's your instinct is how many customers would come in right now if tomorrow you were able to say that you had no financial problems, you could have everybody back to work. Are you going to have the same traffic you had before?
No, definitely not.
That's my point. So this is not, this is why I wanted to talk just bread and butter about immediate things that can be done. Even if she had no debt overhang, even if none of her employees had children back at home or were worried about spreading anything, people aren't going to come in. So what enables that? Not anybody, but not going to come in. What you can do, and you're right about near term, you could begin to be able to get help in terms of how you have a business where you can go online and say, send me your prescription, I can have it filled. This is how we'll do it. And tell me the doc that gave you the prescription, and we will fill the prescription. We will, in fact, be able to do that. Or I need a new prescription, my doc tells me. And this is, so you can do a lot of, quote, telemedicine that way. But the first thing we have to do is, like, for example, the idea you get called back on a Friday there's no one available on a Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, or a Tuesday, or a Wednesday, or Thursday, or a Friday the next week to take care of the child. How do you get that done? Well, that's why I lay out here and I propose a significant child care capacity that we have to build, that we should build now and the government should be paying for as long as this crisis exists. And think of all the people who don't ask for testing. They're afraid to get tested, even if it's available to them, because of the cost. They think it's going to cost them something. And if they get sick and they have to acknowledge they're sick and quarantine for the days that they're sick or while they're sick, the cost of hospitalization. Right now, the President of the United States is trying to do away with the only health care policies out there. And you have millions of businesses, major businesses that have gone out of business where you, in fact, you lose your ability. They've gone out of business, big ones, where they provide health insurance. They've gone out of business, and what do you have? You've been paying in half for that program. Well, I think under the existing law now I think the federal government should pay the other half as long as this exists so you can maintain your privately held insurance. But the generic point I'm trying to make here is, and this is kind of, there's so much out there, is one, how do we enable you with surety to be able to go back to work and feel safe yourself, number one? Be able to ensure that your employees are physically safe. And thirdly, have a sign on the door that customers say, I can go into that business and I know I'm going to be protected because they've done everything that has been said that needs to be done in order to enhance the prospect that I will not, whatever I get in that store, whatever I get in that facility, I am going to get in a way that is not totally dissimilar like it was before the COVID hit. So that's why we need to be able to guarantee that we federally fund paid leave for workers who are caring for their families. We need to ensure that all workers that get sick from COVID, for as long as they need, that their costs are going to be paid for by the federal government. We need all the things that needs to be done to make sure that you are safe and your employees are safe and your customers are safe is in the meantime paid for by the federal government. Now, you shouldn't have to borrow that money. This is a crisis. This is a national, international health crisis. And so if we don't do that, it's going to cost the government a lot more down the road because we can't keep these businesses open. What happens?
I got an idea.
Sure.
One of the largest industry clusters for minority businesses is in janitorial. And so as we think about getting people back to work, many buildings like this are accustomed to regular cleaning. But now you have to do a higher level, which is called sanitizing.
Yeah.
And so here in Pennsylvania, a group of minority and business and civic leaders have come together and formed a PA COVID task force. And we've been looking at janitorial firms and thinking about how we help them get their certifications and licensing for this higher level of cleaning. And so, Vice President, it's a way we could get people to work right now because every restaurant, every business could put an emblem that says this building was clean.
Exactly.
And sanitized.
And that should be paid for by the federal government.
I agree with that.
It should not. Well, that's part of my proposal.
Okay. All right.
That's part of my proposal. The whole idea is how do you change the circumstance where when the press and all of us leave here, we would feel confident to walk into a building. We talk about essential workers, how we give them such credit. We clap for them. We bang pans together. We do the rest. Well, I don't want to clap for them. I want to pay them.
Yes.
Pay them a living wage to do what they do. Because a lot of them are losing their lives. You're going in and you're sanitizing that operating room afterwards. It exposes you. The fact you don't have all the protective equipment these janitorial services don't have. They should be able to get that because they're doing a public service in addition to being able to get paid. Yeah. And again, there goes that big spending Democrat again, spend all that money. If we don't do this, we're going to be in deeper trouble. economically. Why are we, when we learned about the coronavirus the same time that countries like Germany and South Korea and others found out, why are we, in terms of on a percentage basis, why is our unemployment so much higher? Why is our death rate so much higher? Why do we have so many cases that have been diagnosed so far, compared as a percent of population? Significantly higher. I don't mean, obviously we have a larger population, but it's significantly higher percent of people in the United States who have contracted COVID. Significantly higher percentage based on the population that have died. Why? Because the federal government and this administration, this administration did nothing. They did nothing. The Columbia study at Columbia University points out that if the president acted just 2 weeks earlier, 54,000 more people would be alive today. Alive today. Today. And so that's why we can't waste any more time. Imagine the impact on the economy. And just think of it in terms of numbers. If those 54,000 people were still alive. I mean, so the thing that, I think we have to create this Public Health Jobs Corps.
Mr. Vice President, I think it was the Wall Street Journal said that 80% of Americans think that the country's out of control. So when you say about the soul of America, and you're in the district in West Philadelphia, where I said earlier, these are fantastic people, they're very passionate, and they feel like somewhat who's talking to them. So can you talk a little bit connected, because at least me, I think when you talk about the soul of America, talk a little bit about that in context of what you're saying.
Well, look, I know West Philly a little bit, not a lot. The only reason I know it a little bit is I have all granddaughters and grandkids that went to school here and lived up on 59th Street. Anyway, they don't know it well. I don't mean to imply I know it. Okay. But I do know the east side of Wilmington, Delaware, really, really well. I do know my state has the 8th largest African American population in the United States of America. Okay? My city is well over 50% African American. That's what I come out of. I know it. Here's the point about the soul of America. This president, from the very beginning, from the moment he came down that escalator in his golden building, what did he start off saying? I'm going to see to it that we get rid of all those Mexican rapists. That was the first thing he talked about. Secondly, what did he do? He decided that he was going to pit us against one another based on race. When you saw those people in Charlottesville coming out of the fields carrying those torches, their veins, they're bulging and screeching that anti-Semitic hate and bile, using the same phrases used in Germany in the early 30s in Nazi Germany, accompanied by the Ku Klux Klan. The Grand Wizard said, this is why we elected him, okay, of the Ku Klux Klan. And then a young woman gets killed and he gets asked to comment on it. He said there were very fine people on both sides. No president in the history of the United States of America has ever said anything remotely like that. And so what I learned coming out of the movement much, much earlier as a kid is you think you can defeat hate. You can only make it hide. And when you give it oxygen, when a president speaks, no matter how good or bad he is, people listen. And when he speaks and gives credibility to these racist, watch my language, folks out there, he breathes oxygen. They come out from under the rocks. And you're seeing it. You're seeing it all across the country. And as a consequence of that, what happens? We then tile on top of that a triple whammy. Then we end up with COVID. And remember, I'm the guy that asked for the CDC to keep detailed reports on exactly who contracts it exactly who, based on ethnicity, race, national origin, etc., and how many die. Because a friend of mine, the mayor of Detroit, told me what was really happening in Detroit, which I was responsible for in our administration, were people who, in fact, are people of color. Well, guess what? Why is that happening? Because lack of access. And so this is something that I think, and then on top of it, the Floyd family, George gets, brutally murdered for the whole world to see it. You've never seen, and I was a kid when I came back from law school when Dr. King was assassinated. And when I came back, my city is the only city in America occupied by the National Guard since Reconstruction, because a significant portion was burned to the ground. I came back, had a job with a good law firm, and I quit and became a public defender. But even Dr. King's assassination did not have the worldwide impact that George Floyd's death did. Because just like television changed the civil rights movement for the better when they saw Bull Connor and his dogs ripping the clothes off of elderly black women going to church and fire hoses ripping the skin off of young kids. All those folks around the country who didn't have any black populations heard about this, but didn't believe it, but they saw it. It was impossible to close their eyes. Well, what happened to George Floyd, now you got how many people around the country? Millions of cell phones. It's changed the way everybody's looking at this. Look at the millions of people marching around the world. The world. So my point is that I think people are really realizing that this is a battle for the soul of America. Who are we? What do we want to be? How do we see ourselves? What do we think we should be? Character is on the ballot here. That's what this is about. And so that's why I'm convinced that with rational proposals that cost a lot of money, the American public is ready to step up. They understand the need to make these systemic changes, dealing from racism to structures that our economy has just stacked the deck against anybody who doesn't have any money. So for me, I think it's important that we lay out what isn't happening, who it's negatively affecting, and why it is a continuation of the systemic problem we have. Why, by the way, the unemployment rate among Latinos is higher than among blacks. They're both ridiculously high. But what do we talk about? Well, we got to take the blinders have been taken off the American people. And they're looking at it and they're saying, we got to do something. This is not who we are. This is not the world I want my kid growing up, even if they are upper middle class folks. This is not the world I want my kids growing up in. So we have a chance. But I think it's important to lay out ahead of time what are the things that will most affect your collective ability to be around, have jobs, and have the capacity to grow when we get this under control. And that takes you to the thought about wealth. That's why every single first-time home buyer, I provide for a $15,000 down payment, period. Period. That's why I make sure that we double the amount of money that goes from the federal government to small business operations in every state, from $1.5 trillion to $3 trillion. I mean, it should be $3 billion. Taking off the sidelines about $60 billion. That's what it will do. That's all about people being able to get the kind of loans and or guarantees that they need to be able to move. We have to start educating people that the evidence is that black entrepreneurs are equally successful as any other group of entrepreneurs. Their success rate is as high or as good. But we've got to provide the mechanisms. And I guess, as I said, maybe this is just too wonky, as we say, too much detail about how to get there. But we have to do, in my view, we have to create a testing and personal protective gear right off the bat for businesses that they don't have to pay for, so they can, in fact, move forward. Secondly, we got to go out there and we got to make sure we're in a situation where we guaranteed paid leave for anybody who cannot show up because they have somebody suffering from the disease and or they have to be quarantined. Thirdly, it seems to me we have to go out there and make sure that we're in a position where we ensure workers have the protection and there's accountability for those companies, those bigger companies that don't provide that protection. And that's where you get in the whole idea of what are the standards that are going to be set up by Osha and how we're going to make sure they're kept. I think we have to build a national contact tracing workforce that has the benefit of putting 100,000 people to work now to get paid in excess of $15 an hour just to do the tracking by the federal government. That's the thing that's going to pull things under control. And I think we also have to protect older Americans and those with disabilities and, require big employers to tailor work requirements to their needs. And we have to create this, I think, this safer shopper program, because no matter how good you do, unless people are confident they can walk in and be okay, they're not going to walk in your door. And then we have to restart small businesses. We've got to do it in a big way, and that deals with everything from allowing you to be able to get grants for fixed cost in addition to keeping people employed. We have to make sure we grant businesses the cost of restarting in this challenging environment. And we have to reopen our schools and our child care programs. But there's no guidance. There's no guidance out there for how you do that. No guidance. So that's, and I think this is a reflection. If we don't do this, Dwight, it does reflect the lack of a soul. Because so many people are in trouble right now. And we're getting virtually no guidance from the White House. Just going to open up. He's going down to Texas on Juneteenth, right? The first major massacre, literally speaking, of the Black Wall Street, right? Years ago. And he's going to have a rally. And he doesn't wear a mask. And he doesn't think these things. I mean, come on. In the meantime, this is not your problem, but it's going to be your consequence. He's also doing enormous damage to us internationally. We walk away from any cooperation with the World Health Organization. We walk away from any cooperation on vaccines. And I see what worries me the most, I see nothing that is being done to prepare for what the experts and scientists are telling us is likely to be a bounce back. You already have the CDC say they do not have enough protective gear stockpiled now for what's happening. You got 12 states. I'm praying that this is an aberration, but I don't think so. I meet with almost 4 days a week. I have an hour to an hour and a half briefing with Vivek Murthy and the former head of the FDA and the health staff. They're worried. They're worried about what's coming back. And again, what we said from the beginning, I'll stop. You got to have testing and tracing. You've got to have all the protective gear necessary. And you've got to have it stockpiled now, just as a bare minimum to start. But I also think that what we should be doing is giving you and other businesses the ability to say, this is a circumstance in which you can reopen safely. These are the things that have to be done in order to do that. We will pay you to help you do that because it's in the national interest to do that. You will be able not only to be able to have money to keep people employed, but to provide for overhead and infrastructure that you need in order to be able to get, because I think what you said, Tiffany, is you've been completely honest with me. Even if tomorrow you had no restrictions on, you open up completely, who's going to show up? And you're right, Ms. Clark. We've got to prepare the way, begin to prepare the way for the 21st century here, that we're well into it. We got to prepare the way we're going to come back to the future. How we're going to come back and make sure that we are able to deal with what is not just the pandemic. God willing, we'll have a vaccine. But, what happens is how can we better impact on your bottom line and the number of people you have employed by, for example, having the equivalent of telemedicine for you being able to be online, you having the ability and you getting the technical expertise available to tell you how you do that. And that should be a federal government responsibility as well. Because again, it's all about having businesses be able to be open and employ people to generate economic growth. And I haven't even gotten into the things which are even larger. Access to housing, access to health care, access to so many other things that are just basic human necessities. But I've talked too much. Why don't I yield to you guys for anything you want to summarize and or ask me or for me to do some research on?
You actually touched a lot of the things that was going through my mind as far as how we go back to work in a safe environment. What is the plan for some of the people in my community that won't be able to go back to work? That once the unemployment runs out, then what?
It's not going to. We cannot let, as long as this crisis exists, we have to make sure that unemployment is paid. And the unemployment that these guys put together is the most generous unemployment program in American history. $600 on top of whatever your expected unemployment would be. But look at the states that have been so slow in getting it out. States like Florida and others that have been terrible. Your state's been better because it's required, they even put money in, $500 million in there to make sure that you could pull people from other parts of government and quickly train them how to deal with an unemployment claim. Because the number of claims is overwhelming, more than any time in American history. But you're going to be able to get unemployment. We're going to be able to have unemployment for anyone as long as this crisis continues. And for businesses that are larger than yours but smaller than the big businesses, but even those, we should have basically employment insurance. If you had 20 employees, you only needed 10, you keep all 20 on the payroll, they all work half time, and the federal government makes up the rest. So they get their full salary, you have all the workforce you need, and people aren't left out and sitting home and then end up in a circumstance where they're collecting unemployment. And you know as well as I do, you know extremely well, Della, that if you have someone who has the same exact background and record as the other person, one person has been unemployed 3 weeks, another person has been unemployed 6 months, and they both apply for the job, what happens? The person who's been around 6 months, they just take off the table. They don't even look at them. Implication is they must be not as good as the other, or they would have been hired already. So there's a real concern about providing people with some dignity. Just some dignity. My dad used to have an expression, though. He'd say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about your place in the community. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, and mean it. We moved from Pennsylvania. When Cole died, I was in grade school. My dad didn't have a job. I remember him walking up the stairs and saying, honey, you're going to have to go live with Grandpa. It'll be about a year. The longest walk any parent makes, and a lot of black and white and Hispanic parents have made that walk. He said, I'll come home every weekend. Only 157 miles down to Claymont, Delaware. And I thought, God, that's like going to the moon. I was in grade school. Well, I then moved down to Claymont, Delaware. You know Claymont. Okay, well, Claymont was a real working class town, a steel mill town. Get up in the morning when there was frost in the window and drive you to school, turn on the windshield wiper, and there'd be an oil slick. Not joking, an oil slick on because there's more refineries and markets look in that area than anywhere else. Pennsylvania didn't do much about it because the prevailing wind is south and east. So, you know, I'm not looking at, you know, I think people are going through the devil. But at least my dad, he thought that he meant it. We're going to be okay. He thought there was kind of an even shot out there. And if you work like hell, it took 2 years to be able to get enough money to 3 years to be able to put a down payment on a house. We had, you know, 4 kids, 3 bedrooms, and a grandpop in a split-level home. We didn't think anything wrong with that. It was a safe neighborhood. But my point is, he had a shot. Look, all the people don't get a shot now, even to get there. This is not only about dealing with, in my view, it's not only about restoring the dignity and soul of this country. It's about this time when we have a chance to rebuild a middle class, bring everybody along. Everybody. Black, Hispanic, disabled. Bring everybody along. And we can do this. Because the public is now seeing what happens when you're left out, you're left aside. Or more of your folks have died providing services. The grocery store workers stacking the shelves have died. And all of a sudden people are realizing the people who can shelter in place, like you all have been able to do, and me, who's been carrying us on their back? The essential workers. Anyway.
I think they want to take a picture of us. Like, that's what you want to.
Well, does anybody want to say anything? Because what I need is your phone numbers too.
Okay.
So I want to be able to call you too, for real.
I want, one of my big concerns, Vice President, is time. If you look at 3 months, and we've had approximately 41% of minority businesses shutter their doors.
Yep.
In another 3 months, because we're living with uncertainty about opening up doors, and whether it be PPP equipment or whatever we need, the clock is ticking.
That's right.
Right? And every month that go by that these small businesses are not able to generate revenue, not able to bring back or keep employees, it's just putting us further and further behind. And so my concern is, what are we going to do right now from a time standpoint, and how do we get Tiffany as an example? I recognize she's in the eyewear, but maybe it's an investment in her to start this sanitizing business as an example. And start going around to other eyeglass places and sanitizing their business. We have to be able to help businesses pivot right now.
Well, I think what you have to do is, right now there are a number of programs available where you can be closed and still, in fact, make money, where the federal government will make sure your employees and you are taken care of. It's providing for the programs that have already been passed that have not been made available to small businesses. The money is there. It's sitting there now.
I'd like to know, yeah.
Well, I guarantee you it is. I guarantee you it is. $2 trillion. But you have now a significant portion of it is going to the wrong people. Because either you don't have the capacity to know how to apply for it, or you have the capacity. For example, one of the things that happened when we started, and I'll end with this, one of the things when we started, when this program first passed, the first CARES Act, I said that we should, what I would propose the President do is I would have him use the Defense Production Act, which is the thing that allows him to designate an operation. You're going to shift from making, you know, pajamas to making gowns for people in operating rooms. I said we should have someone oversee the large banks and where they're going to lend, because they never lend to small businesses. Never. So you go to a big bank, and I'm not going to mention any of them right now, but I can, and you say, and their loan is guaranteed. They're guaranteed. We bail them out. They're guaranteed. Okay? And so they're supposed to be the conduit. What do they say to you? Do you have an account here? Do you have an account? Do you have a credit card with us? How long you been doing business with us, et cetera? Well, what the hell? And I knew they don't like lending to small businesses. It's too tedious for them. It takes too much time. So they'd much rather have somebody come in, a major real estate developer of a Trump friend, and come in and lend them $58 million, give them $58 million under the program is easy to do. It's easy to do. And that's when Dwight and others went back and said, we're going to get community banks then involved. If you work in a community in West Philly, then you got to be able to lend in West Philly. Well, that's helped some. But the idea, the money's not getting there. And it was designed to get there. How many, Dwight, I can't remember how, maybe my staff remembers, but how much money is in the downtown small business fund? I forget the exact name, but I think I forget how many $1 billion it is. As of last week, not a penny of it was loaned yet. Not a penny of it was put out there. There's a lot of money there now. And what we're pushing to do is make sure that this not only covers the employees you keep employed. If you're trying to keep someone on the payroll, you get paid to keep them on the payroll, number one. And number two, your overhead gets paid. Your overhead gets paid, whether or not you have a customer coming in. That was the intent of the program. So that while we built back the ability to show up and open up, that in fact you still had employees who were getting paid. And you were able to make it. So you didn't lose your business. How many people are losing their business because they're basically going bankrupt? They're going bankrupt. Think of all the people right now in West Philly who have a home who can't pay their mortgage now. Well, they should be guaranteed while this is going on, their mortgage gets paid. How about rent? Look at all the people now. They're sitting there and they're saying, okay, so I get a loan, but what happens when, in fact, 6 months from now I have a rent check, a rent bill that I have that is, I don't know, $6,000 or larger. Where do I get the money for that? And so that's what these programs were designed to do to help. And if you notice, you don't have any, I don't, it's going to sound self-serving, but when I was asked to take care of the Recovery Act in the Obama-Biden administration, it was over $80 billion we got out in less than 18 months. I was on the phone every single day. I spoke with over 156 mayors. Every governor but one, the woman from Alaska, could see Russia from her front porch. Okay. I tried, but she was not interested. All kidding aside. And they'd say, well, I'd say, we need this much money. I said, okay. And this is what we're going to do to increase employment. We're going to build, one guy said, we're going to build a polar bear park. I said, no. He said, under the law, I can do that. I said, yeah, you can, but it's going to make the program look silly. Here's the deal. If you build it, I'm going to come out and hold a press conference and say you're wasting money. You wouldn't do that. Try me. Try me. It takes moment to moment to moment care. But guess what? The money got to where it had to go. Kept all those teachers employed because the states couldn't pay for them. Kept all those firefighters on the job because they couldn't be paid for. Those first responders on the job because they couldn't be paid for. That's where it came from. But look what's happening now. This guy Dwight's been trying to get money for state and local assistance because they all have balanced budgets.
Correct.
And what's happened? They're all going into gigantic debt and they can't borrow the money. And it's not happening. So there are answers. There are answers. And there are answers that are available right now. But, you know, this idea of somehow separating the COVID crisis from the jobless crisis is a fool's errand. They're tied together. Unless you deal with the COVID crisis, you're not going to be able to ultimately deal with the job crisis. And they're simultaneous. But like I said, even now, we have a. Let me give you a few little points. Texas has reported the highest number of hospitalizations since the pandemic. Meanwhile, the White House task force on the pandemic has not even met since May the 28th. Okay, hadn't even met. And the testing czar, the guy supposed to be the czar to set up testing, is resigning. What is this? What in God's name are we talking about? So, we got to be able, that old saying goes, walk and chew gum at the same time here. Because there's no reason why a woman who's as capable as you running a business should be in a position as a consequence of the failure of the president and the administration to be able to deal with this crisis, essentially going out of business and have nothing over your head. No reason. None. This money wasn't supposed to go to the Fortune 500 companies. And I mean, seriously. I'm not making them. They don't need it. But look at what's happening. So, anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you a memo that lays out the specific things that I think we could do to promote small businesses, particularly minority-owned businesses, and make sure how we do it so you know what I'm talking about and what we do in the real recovery when we invest real money to create significantly new jobs. Mm-hmm. I'll send to you what we're doing relative to all the issues relating to the health and safety of SEIU workers. I mean, you represent everyone from nurses all the way down to sanitation workers. Mm-hmm. And what we do. And I'll send you, Tiffany, a layout of what I think, and I will get one of my experts on the phone with you to see how we can actually personally try to figure out how we can guide you to get to the programs that are available to you.
And just send me that I want to win.
Well, Dwight, if I win, it's in no small part because you came out early to say I should win. Mm-hmm. But look, I don't have, to state the obvious, all the answers. But the one thing I promise you I'll do, I'll take responsibility. No president that I've ever witnessed as a student of history has been smart enough to handle all the problems. When I make a mistake, I'll say it. I'll acknowledge it and fix it. And I think we just have to take more responsibility in government. And the idea, like I said, the words of a president matter, no matter who the president is. The words of a president, no matter how competent or incompetent they are, can send a nation to war. They can bring peace. They can make the stock market rise or fall. Look what's happening now. Only thing he's been concerned about is the stock market. And there is very little correlation between the health of the stock market and the quality of life for the vast majority of middle class and working class and poor folks. It's just almost totally disconnected. Doesn't mean it's not a good thing to have the stock market boom, but it does mean it's not a good thing when there's no way in which that wealth is able to be shared. Imagine if we had that $2 trillion tax cut that he promoted and got passed for the wealthy. Even places like the Heritage Foundation said it didn't grow the economy. $2 trillion. Imagine if we had it right now to focus on the things that can build a new economy, invest in everything from teleconferencing to providing for the kind of help.
Vice President, I would love for you to wave your hand at Jeff Wickland back there. He's got that blue shirt. Jeff, stand up.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Jeff has been with the Enterprise Center over 20 years, and he manages our real estate and facility, and he helped to make this event successful today, and I just want you to recognize him.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much, pal. I really mean it. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to take a group photo. If you just look at Adam in the blue blazer with his hand raised,
Right there.
take it from our seats.
Think about questions you haven't asked me you want to ask. I'll make sure you have phone numbers you can get so we can follow up on the things I said, okay?
Yes. Thank you. I'm smiling. I forgot I had a mask on. Yes, I do that all the time.
Well, I'll tell you what. You saw all the heat I got for wearing a mask. And Trump not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
But I tell you what. Science matters.
Yes.
So anyway. Dwight, thank you, pal.
Anytime,
I really
anytime,
mean
Vice
it. Thank
President.
you. And
Anytime.
I got my
make sure
card.
staff took all those notes, and I'm going to follow up on each.
I got my card, Vice President.
Great.
All right.
She good.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we have Tiffany's number, I think. I'm not certain.
We have all of their numbers and I took notes on the follow-up that you wanted.
Okay. Dwight, thanks, pal.
Thank you. Anytime, Vice President.
Thanks for the passport into your district.
Oh,
I appreciate it.
you were here a week ago at City Hall.
Yep.
That's in there. So if you want to get a place, let us know.
Well, I tell you what, all I know is that I'm still, my son who passed away went to Penn, and he had to borrow the money we had to borrow to get there, and he's never missed a payment, and so I'm still hanging out, paying off the last end of that loan. But it was the best thing that happened. Philly's a great city.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you
having
very
us.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
all. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Every time I walk out of my grandpa's house in Scranton, he yells, "Joey, keep the faith." Spread it. We can do this, guys. We can change this country for the better.
I agree.
The neat thing about America is every significant crisis we've had, we're the only country that turned it into hospital. We can do this with your help.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
You good, Tiffany. Y'all really was passion fired up. Y'all really fired up. You did.
I felt like I was just sitting here.
You did. You was getting into it.
I was
That
trying.
Delaware was
But
to
you know
take
what it
my word
was?
for it.
You know what it was? Everything that I wanted to ask
I'm
him,
pushing you
He
right.
was
he was
already
touching
saying.
on it.
Do I?
You know I'm pushing.
You know,